All right, happy Thursday. I recorded this video because of us attending the play during third and fourth period, making it available so that everybody can work on their math at any point on Thursday, as long as you get your 3-6 online done by 8 a.m. on Friday. So the past 2 days that we have been working with, in 3-5 we worked with graphing lines by finding the x and y intercepts. And 3-4, we worked with graphing lines by using the slope and the y-intercept. And we could write equations in y equals mx plus b. And you could do that because we had the slope and we had the y-intercept. Now, the slope is pretty straightforward. They're going to give us the slope, or we can calculate the slope. You guys are really good at that. But they're not always going to give us the y-intercept. And so sometimes it's hard to use that formula, or impossible to use that formula, because we don't have the y-intercept. But that's where 3-6 comes into play. So we can write an equation in point slope form when they give us the slope and a point. Okay, when they give us the slope and a point, we can put it in point slope form. It's easier to use because every single point works, whereas slope intercept, the only point that works is the y-intercept, and it's really specific. So not that y equals mx plus b is bad, it's just not always the easiest. Okay, so point slope form looks a little more complex, but it's actually the easiest. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And really there's only three things you have to replace here: y1, m, and x1. The y, the minus, the equals, the parentheses, and the x minus are going to show up in every single equation. So m, we all know, stands for slope. That is the slope of the line. And x1, y1 is a point on the line. Again, remember those little ones just mean they're labels. So x1 is just saying it's the x coordinate from the point. Okay, so first off, here's an example of what an equation looks like when it's written in point slope form. And it says, find the slope and the point on the line. So they want us to take the information back out of this equation. Now remember, up here, the y and the minus stay. That 2 is the y coordinate from the point. 5/4 is the slope. Now here's where it's a little tricky. We need to leave behind an x and a minus. What number did they put in there if it ultimately turned to plus? Well, that would be a -3, because you guys know, whoopsies, erase that, two negatives right next to each other actually equal a positive. So I need to leave behind the x and the negative. So I'm actually going to pull out a -3 as my coordinate. Now this seems confusing, but I just want you to look. 5/4 slope, super easy to pull out. The number in front of the parentheses, bingo, bango, easy to do. Okay, your point, right here, it looks like y and a -2, but I'm actually pulling out a +2. Right here, it looks like x and a +3, but I'm actually pulling out a negative. The equation and the point are opposite signs. And that's because we have to leave that negative behind. If it looks like a negative in the equation, it was a positive in the original. If it looks like a positive in the equation, it was a negative in the point. So take a minute and see if you can do B. See if you can find for me the slope and the y-intercept, or sorry, the slope and the x1, y1, the point. The slope is always the number in front of the parentheses. And this one's like, there's no number there, Miss Huff. What number is actually there, though, with that negative sign? A 1. So this is really a -1. Then we look in our point. And remember, you got to write x comma y. So right here, this looks like y and a positive 3. So in my point, it's actually a negative 3 because I need to leave behind a negative with my y, or a minus sign. With the x, it looks like a positive 2, but that means it's actually a negative 2 because I need to leave behind a negative sign. So when you pull that information out of there, slope is super easy. The point is the opposite of what it initially appears. Write an equation in point slope form for the line that passes through negative 1, 2, and has a slope of negative 2. Then graph it. Okay, so if we just focus on the equation, they tell us the point is negative 1, 2, and the slope is negative 2. So when we're writing this equation, every single time, the y is going to be there. The minus is going to be there. Now, in y1, I need to put my y coordinate, which is a 2. In my slope, or in the m, I put in the slope, which is negative 2. I'm going to have a parenthesis and an x minus, and my x1 is negative 1. There's only one thing you have to do to this equation before it would be finalized, and that's these two negative signs right here in a row. When you subtract a negative, you're actually adding. So y minus 2 equals negative 2 times x plus 1. That's done. That is the point slope form. Point slope form is always going to have parentheses in the equation. Point slope form is always going to have parentheses in the equation. Now, if we're going to graph this, not yesterday, but the last couple of days when we've graphed, we've always plotted the y-intercept. Well, we don't have the y-intercept. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to plot the point that they gave us, which in this case, the point that they gave us was negative 1, 2. So on my graph, I need to plot negative 1, 2. So negative 1 is my x, 2 is my y. So I plot my point there. And then step number 2 is to use your slope, just like we did with slope-intercept. Our slope in this case is negative 2, which we should always write as a fraction as over 1. Now remember, your slope is rise over run. I have a negative 2 rise, which tells me to go. My options are up or down, which in this case would be down 2. And then I'm always going to go to the right. I'm always going to go to the right. So I count down 2, right 1. Technically, you only need 1 point. Miss Hoff, when she does it on the computer, or sorry, on paper, does a couple of points just so her line looks better. But on Alex, you only have to do 1 other point. So the difference today is that when you plot the point, it's not the y-intercept, but it's just a point on the line. So it's going to be just anywhere in your random coordinate plane. And then remember to use your slope, rise over run. Take a minute and do problem number 3 on your own, and then I'm going to show you the correct answer here. Write the equation in point slope form. That's nice. That's the easy one. It passes through 2, 4, and has a slope of negative 3/2. All right, so if I'm going to write my equation, y minus y1 is my y-coordinate, which in this case is 4. Y minus 4 equals, my slope is negative 3 over 2, parenthesis, x minus, my x-coordinate is 2. I do not have any double negatives in my y's or my x's, so I actually don't have any adjustments to make, and that is my final equation. So then if I'm going to graph it, number 1, I need to plot my point. In this case, my point is 2, 4. So on my graph, x is 2, y is 4, so I put my point right here. Step number 2 is to use the slope. In this case, my slope is negative 3 over 2. Remember, Ms. Hoff says, put the negative on the top. Put the negative on the top. So I have negative 3 over 2, reminding it is rise over run. Therefore, I am going to go down 3 because it's a negative, but Ms. Hoff reminds me, always go to the right 2. So start at your point. Put your pencil on that point, and from there, count down 3. 1, 2, 3, right 2. 1, 2, put a point. Technically, you could do it again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Now, again, on Alex, you only have to have those 2 points, so I'm not requiring that you have more than that. But just so you know, you could actually do it over and over until you run out of space. Double check that you have the correct formula, and then double check you've graphed it correctly. All right, so they're going to mix it up again. This time, they're just going to say graph the line, and they just give us the equation. So now we have to mix together the 2 pieces that we just did. We have to pull the information out first, then we're going to use it to graph. And remember, it's always y minus m times x minus. So these coordinates in here are x and y, and they're always the opposite. The equation and the point are the opposite. The easy one right away is your slope. Your slope is 1/4. Simple, simple, simple. On your equation, your y stays and a minus sign stays. But because this is a plus, that means you really put in a -4. So the y-coordinate on my point is actually -4. My x has to stay, my minus sign has to stay, which in this case then is just a plain old 2. And I remind you, in the equation it looks positive, but in the point it is negative. In the equation it looks negative, but in the point is positive. And that has to deal with because we have to leave behind that negative sign. Now that we have this information, we can now go over to our graph. Step number 1, plot the point. The point that we just pulled out was 2, -4. So 2, -4 is here. Then step number 2 is to use the slope. Our slope is 1/4. Reminding ourselves our slope is rise over run. We always have to go 2 directions, up and down, then left or right. Because 1 is positive, I'm going up 1, and Ms. Hoff reminds me I'm always going to the right 4. So from the point you just plotted, you go up 1, right 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Technically, you could do it again. Up 1, right 4. Alex only makes you have 2, though, and then you can draw your graph or draw your line. Okay, so in that case, you have to pull the information out and then use it to graph. This one says, write an equation in point-slope form for the line on a graph. So in this problem, they're going to give us the graph, and it's going to have 2 points on it. Okay? Now notice, the last time we did this, we had a really nice y-intercept, but I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know what that y-intercept is. And it's not a whole number, because if it was a whole number, it'd either cross at 1 right there or at 2, and it definitely doesn't cross at either one. So it's going to be some type of fraction, and we all know how we feel about fractions. We hate them. Well, the part about this problem is the directions just say write an equation. What I'm telling you and helping you with is put it in point slope form. Alex doesn't care. They weren't specific. It just says write an equation in Alex. Miss Hoff entered put it in point slope form to help you out. Okay, but you're like, whoa, point slope form. I have to have a point, which I do, but I have to have the slope, and I don't have the slope. Except for you have 2 points on that graph, right? And we can find the slope from 2 points. So we need to write down the coordinates of point A and B. Let's write down A and B. Right now, fill in these coordinates right here. Tell me where point A is and point B is. I'm going to give you a second to fill those in. All right, point A would be located at negative, whoopsies, negative 6, 6, and point B would be located at 4, negative 2. So the first thing that we have to do is to find the slope, and this is really good review because it feels like an eternity ago that we calculated slope. You guys were good at it, but it feels like forever ago. So remember, y on top, y on top, y on top. So we really got to take y minus y over x minus x. 6 minus negative 2, negative 6 minus 4. When I have two negatives next to each other, I'm actually adding. So I end up with 8. Negative 6 minus 4 is negative 10. Ms. Hoff always says negative on the top. Put the negative on the top. And I can also divide by 2. So I'm moving that negative up. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. I can't reduce anymore. So that's my slope here. Now, at this point, it does not matter which point you use. You know your slope is going to be negative 5 or 4/5. But you can figure out if you want to use point A or point B. If you use point A, your equation would look like y minus 6 equals negative 4/5 times x minus negative 6. We have to fix this double negative. Y minus 6 equals negative 4/5 x plus 6. You could also use the point 4, negative 2, and you would write y minus negative 2 equals negative 4/5 times x minus 4. This time our y is the double negative. Y plus 2 equals negative 4/5 times x minus 4. The hard part about this is, on Alex, it doesn't give you the answer in point slope. And so people always come to me and say, Ms. Hoff, it makes me write it in slope intercept. No, it doesn't. If you put the answer in point slope and you are correct, it will count it right. I promise you. But if it counts it wrong, that means your slope is off or your point is off. So always double check those. The computer doesn't care because it doesn't specifically say what format to use. All right, I want you to do this same exact thing all on your own start to finish. First, write the points down. Second, find the slope. And third, write the equation in point slope form. If I write, excuse me, if I write down my coordinates, A would be at, oops, -5, -5. B would be at 3, -3. So my slope, if I label these x and y so I don't forget, would be -5 minus -3 divided by -5 minus 3. Be careful because then when they have the same coordinates, it's super tricky, so make sure you keep track of that. These two negatives really mean I'm adding, so -5 plus 3 would be -2. -5 minus 3 would be -8. Here's a common mistake that was on your guys' quiz. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. They both cancel, but I can reduce this by dividing a 2 out, so I end up with 1/4. So it does not matter which point you use. You could write either of the following. Y, oopsies, come on, pen. Y minus -5 equals 1/4 times x minus -5, which both of those would turn into y plus 5 equals 1/4 x plus 5. You could write that as an answer. Or y minus 3, nope, y minus, screwed that up. -3 equals 1/4 times x minus 3, which would become y plus 3 equals 1/4 times x minus 3. Either one of those would be correct. So now that you've watched this and you've taken notes, you have 3-6 online that is open. It opens at 8 a.m., whoopsies, 8 a.m. on Thursday, and it is open, it closes at 8 a.m. on Friday. So I don't care what class period you have math on there when you do this, when you watch the video, as long as you have it done by 8 a.m. on Friday. All right. Actually, I'm even going to adjust this. I will open 3-6 today. You're going to have to get 100% on today's, and then it'll open, and I'll leave it open till Friday. So today is actually Wednesday that I'm doing this. So if you watch this on Wednesday, you could get this done. Just know that like 5th hour and 7th hour math class, you are going to have class on Thursday. So if you get it done ahead of time, that's fine, but then you have to have something to do in class without Miss Hoff redirecting you to say, get started, stop talking, get something out. So it's fine if you do it ahead of time, but just be prepared that you have something to complete during your class period. I will see everyone in class on Friday.